Hi, this is Muho. Today I would like to continue to talk about Edward's winter report, which he wrote about the history of Antaiji with a focus on the history when my teacher, Miyaula Roshi, was the abbot. Although in today's talk it's still about the history of Antaiji when it moved from Kyoto to the present location in Hyogo. That was when my teacher's teacher, Watanabe Roshi, was the abbot. I will read the text this time. Edward's first question is, how many people were there when Watanabe moved Antaiji? And my answer, in the beginning there were 30, but I never saw a picture with 30 people. Probably at the time when Uchiyama retired, there were 30 people or more. During Sesshin, there could have been 50 or 60. So that's basically hearsay that I heard from the so-called old boys, people who practiced at Antaiji at the time. I often heard this number. In the beginning, we were 30. The funny thing is that there's lots of photographs, old photographs from the time when Antaiji was still in Kyoto and also when it moved and after it moved. People took quite a lot of photographs at parties and also during the work and kind of when they gathered in front of the Hondo. And well, as I say here, for some reason, there's never 30 people in the picture. So how come, if there had been 30 people at the time, that there's no shot of these 30 people? Well, it could be that it was logistically impossible to call everybody together into one picture. But another explanation could be that people are just, well, overstating the numbers. I don't know. It's the same with the amount of snow. Like when I came to Antaiji, we rarely had more than 2 meters of snow in the winter. Sometimes 1 meter, sometimes 2 meters. But then the old boys said, oh, you have it so good. We always had 4 meters of snow in the first couple of years. But then again, there's quite a lot of pictures of Antaiji in the winter, but there's never 4 meters of snow. Actually, 6 or 7 years ago, there were 2 winters where we had 4 meters of snow and we were drowning in the snow. And the pictures from 40 years ago when Antaiji just moved, they show snow, but actually is not so different from when I first came to Antaiji. That means a meter, 2 meters, maybe 2.5 meters. So whatever, maybe people were so busy shoveling snow that they had no time to take pictures when it got really tough. Or it could be that people were just a little bit exaggerating. I don't know. Whatever. So what I hear from the old guys is that 30 people lived at Antaiji in the beginning when Watanabe Roshi was the abbot. And in Kyoto during Sesshin often it was double the amount of people because people came from outside. I heard from Watanabe that it was a pain in the ass to have to deal with Uchiyama's students. Age-wise, a good number of them were older than him. Watanabe was around 32 when he became the abbot in 1975. He was 6 years older than Miyaura. And when Miyaura became the abbot in 1987, Watanabe Roshi obviously told all the students that they should leave Antaiji. And well, he told me that he did that for Miyaura to make it easier for him to organize Antaiji, because he felt that when he became the abbot, it was actually difficult to to deal with the old students that age-wise were around his age, or some were even older than him. So when Watanabe became the abbot, Uchiyama students didn't think of him as their teacher. They thought of him as a Dharma brother. They all had their own opinions about how Antaiji should be run and how it should look like once it moves up there. But Watanabe was this strong character and this Trump-like personality that doesn't tolerate other opinions. He wants people that follow his orders and do what he expects them to do. I can imagine that Watanabe treasured those people that didn't have a strong connection with Uchiyama. Miyaura was one of the few of those. But then there were also the monks who had already spent a number of 7 years. I don't know why the number 7 appears here. I will erase that because it doesn't really belong in here. But then there were also the monks who had already spent a number of years with Uchiyama in Kyoto, but then went to continue to practice at the new Antaiji. Then went to continue to practice. In the beginning, there were quite a lot of people who didn't look up to Watanabe as abbot, but still had Uchiyama as the teacher in their minds. Whenever Watanabe would say or do things that wouldn't accord with their idea of what Uchiyama would have said or done, then they would resist, which made it difficult for Watanabe at the beginning. So I could imagine that this especially relates to things like the amount of zazen, the amount of work. In the beginning, because, well, the monks didn't build the actual buildings, but they built a dam in the mountains to collect water, so that they had continuous water supply. They built the stairs up to the building. There's lots of hard work that the monks wouldn't do in Kyoto, and instead they had, well, the time to do zazen. And the new Antaiji is also focused on zazen, but after the hard work, probably a lot of, especially the older monks, didn't feel that they had the strength and energy to do zazen if it took place at all and if a session wasn't cancelled. After all the hard work, people didn't feel fresh enough for that. So I could imagine that some of them would say, well, that's not the idea that Uchiyama had in mind when he took over the embassy of Antaiji. We didn't do it like this in Kyoto. The next question of Edward is, how long was he in Kyoto? So that means how long was Watanabe in Kyoto after he took over the embassy? My answer, 2 years. He became abbot in early 1975, and they started to move in the autumn of 1976. Actually, the temple buildings were built starting in spring of 1977, so the first winter they spent in the old houses of the village that used to be there. The village, most of the village was vacated already in the late 1960s, I think. Maybe there was 1 or 2 houses left where people lived, but most of the old farmers had already left the village, and during the first winter they still lived in these houses, but then the next year most of these houses were torn down. Next question, was the Sangha that moved here mostly Japanese? My answer, I think so. If you look into the yearbooks, there's only 2 or 3 foreigners that wrote articles in there at the time. So for many years, Antaiji published a yearbook usually in the late autumn, and everybody who stayed at Antalya would have to write an article. Also, maybe sometimes people that didn't live in Antalya but felt connected to Antalya would also contribute something. And so if you look at these yearbooks, you see how many people lived there at a time and what their practice meant for them, because that's basically what they usually write about. And again, also in these yearbooks, I don't think that there's any yearbook where there's 30 people that actually stayed at Antalya and wrote articles there. And again, most of them were Japanese, only 2 or 3 foreigners in the beginning. After a few years, these foreigners had all left, but then 3 Italians came here with their girlfriends. The first of them came at the end of the 1970s and stayed for 6 months. Then he went back to Italy to bring all his friends. Then they all came here in 1980. And as far as I know, the 3 women stayed for 2 years and in the beginning lived in a separate building. But then, for some reason, when Watanabe Roshi married, not right at once, but after some time, the 3 Italian women were sent back home and only the guy stayed on. Question. You said that Watanabe got into arguments easily. Were there many strong characters at the beginning? Was such a thing possible under someone like Watanabe? There were some strong characters, and there were others who needed a person like Watanabe, a strong father figure. They enjoyed the attention they got and the expectations that were put upon them. Like I imagine now with the Trump administration, there are some people around who probably need this figure there, while other more confrontational figures leave. It was the same with Watanabe. During the first few years, quite a few people left. If there were 30 people in the beginning, at least half left after not so long. You can check the names in the yearbooks. The names start to disappear. I heard they left because some of them were quite similar to Watanabe. They had strong opinions, were strong characters, and had a very low capability to make compromises. So when it came to a clash, they had to leave. Was he pushing people out? Edward asks, and he means Watanabe. My answer, that also happens. Question. What happened with the property at Kyoto? My answer. Most of it was sold, and that's what they built, what they bought, the property that we now have from, and also they paid with that money for the move. Most of it was sold, but there's a small piece that is about 120 square meters or something. You could build a little house on there. It's a memorial piece, but a pain in the ass because you have to weed it from time to time. Otherwise the neighbors complain. And from present-day Antalya to Kyoto, it's about 4 hours with a car. 8 hours to go there and to come back. So that's what I mean when I say it's a pain in the ass, because you have to clean it from time to time, and we're already busy at Antalya with the work there. One could sell it, or for the future build something there like a zendo. At one point I was thinking of doing that, but I've forgotten about it. I won't be the one who will do it. Question. Did many people stay in Kyoto instead of move with Antalya? My answer. I guess most of the hippies stayed in Kyoto. A lot of them were in relationships and had teaching jobs. They loved to come to the sessions, but they also enjoyed the life in the city, I guess. But the Japanese, most of them at first came to Hyogo, but a few found other temples. There is, for example, a temple that used to be connected to Antaiji in Saitama, not too far from Tokyo, called Kannondo. In the beginning, people were coming and going from there. One student of Uchiyama's took responsibility of that. Of course, some people stopped being monks altogether, other people just became ordinary temple priests. I know about one strong character who had a clash with Watanabe, and he stripped him of his status as a monk 4 years after they moved to Hyogo. Question: is that even possible? My answer: technically it is not. If you want to quit being a monk, you need your teacher's seal, but also your own seal, plus the seal of a relative. So it's impossible for a teacher to disrobe a student without his consent, and that of another relative. And it is also impossible for students to formally disrobe without the consent of the teacher and a relative. Actually, it is harder to leave the monkhood than to enter it, because for ordination you only need to have your own seal and that of your teacher. You do not need the permission of a relative. Anyway, what Watanabe did was forge the 2 signatures and seals of the monk himself and a relative, an older brother that was already deceased. When that monk finally left Antaiji, he didn't know he had been stripped of his monkhood. He found a temple where they were looking for a priest and said, "If it's okay with you, I can do the job." They said fine, and contacted the Soto Shu, so the Soto Zen headquarters in Tokyo, who said, "What are you talking about? This guy is not officially a monk anymore." So he asked the Soto Shu to show him the papers, and he saw these forged signatures. He had to find a new teacher and reordain. He finally became a temple priest a bit later on. So that's the story of a guy who still sends us New Year's cards and sometimes calendars. A nice guy, but also very strong character. So I could imagine that there were a number of these strong figures in Kyoto, and probably it was easier for them under Uchiyama Roshi to coexist. Uchiyama Roshi being more kind of a motherly figure that could, how do you say, give space to a number of strong-minded, strong-willed characters, while Watanabe Roshi would more be like a fatherly figure, and if you didn't want to follow him, then you had to move on. Okay, so much for today. One thing about my Zazen group in Osaka: if anybody watching this is living in Japan, maybe close to Osaka, we meet every Sunday morning from 6:40 to 7:40, and we're sitting in a different spot now. It's called Kakshi Kuruwa in Japanese, and in English they say Kakshi Kuruwa Bailey. Kuruwa means Bailey, obviously, and Kakshi means hidden, so the hidden Bailey. It's a kind of, not a secret spot, but it's a spot that few people know. So although it's very close to the castle itself, very few people go there. Last couple of times we were 8 or 9 people, and if you want to know where it is, I will put videos below here, so you can find it. Or if you go to the Antaiji homepage to Muho and click on events, then you also find some information, and you will find my email address. So if you want to participate but you're not sure how to find me, how to find the Zazen group, then please email me. Okay, so much for today. Have a good time. All the best.